Hello all, and welcome to Meanwhile in the West, my weekly series where I read the letters to the editor in my local newspaper, The West Australian, and criticise all the stupid people who write in asking stupid questions and making stupid comments. First letter. Making sense of it, 21st of May 2014. If the budget is as politically suicidal as has been suggested, why is the coalition pursuing it? Does it mean we finally have some people who are putting the country before their jobs? And if Australia is in such a strong position and there is no crisis present or looming, as we continue to hear, why do we have so many people on welfare? Mark Thornton, Sorrento. Okay, so you've misunderstood a few things here. So yes, the budget is widely unpopular. Many budgets are, from both political sides of the political spectrum. And the fact that a government insists on pushing through with it doesn't necessarily mean that they are putting the interests of the Australia in front of their jobs, but actually often politicians on both sides of Parliament and all sides of the political spectrum generally do want the best for this country. They may be misguided, they may be mistaken, I may disagree with them thoroughly, but many people in Parliament actually do want the best for this country and think that they are doing the right thing. And so yes, many politicians are pushed to do things which are politically not particularly popular because they think it's the right thing to do. That said, I suspect that the government didn't realise it was going to be this politically unpopular, but there's also another thing that sometimes backing down from something that is unpopular is even more unpopular. And so there is some wisdom, or at least that some of the popular wisdom is that once you've said you're going to do something unpopular, you kind of have to stick to it no matter how unpopular it gets. We'll see. A lot of this stuff is getting blocked anyway, so in the end I'm not sure how bad it'll be. It's the first budget of 3 in this political cycle, so they've got 2 more budgets to make up for it anyway. And so in some ways you want to do your unpopular stuff early in your term. So it doesn't really mean too much one way or the other. And also by your same logic, I suspect that you know, not particularly fans of Labor. Labor did a lot of unpopular things when they were in power for the 6 odd years before that. I doubt you would subscribe the purest motives to them for doing that. I might, you probably wouldn't. The other thing is about, yes, why do we have so many people on welfare? Now, the interesting thing here is that the rates of sort of welfare recipients in Australia is, depends what you mean by welfare. If you mean what is commonly called the dole, so we're looking at working age people who are unemployed and receiving some kind of income support from the government, there's about 1 million of them, give or take, which is just under 5% of the population. We've got about 22 million here. The official unemployment figure is about 5.8%. So depending how which way you fudge it, most of those people who are, because that takes into account other things, so most of those people who are unemployed are probably receiving some kind of employment support. 5.8% is quite a low number for unemployment. It's not the bottom ever, but most economists agree that somewhere in the high 4%, so 4.8 or somewhere just under 5%, is probably what we would call full employment. That is, because very few people walk out of one job and walk immediately into another, there's usually a grace period between, and because companies go bust and people lose their jobs involuntarily and it takes them a while to find another job, and various factors like that, basically, it's impossible to have a 0% unemployment rate. What they've found, what economists generally agree on, is that a completely smoothly running economy where everybody who wants a job can get a job will have an unemployment rate at around 4.8% or so. That's about the lowest you're ever going to get it. And we have been low, maybe 4.5%. We have been down that in Australia not that long ago. Certainly parts of Australia, WA in particular, has been sitting on for about 4.5%, has had that in the recent history. So 5.8 in comparison to that is not a lot more. There's approximately maybe 200,000 other people Australia-wide who want jobs and can't get them, basically what that means, and are actively looking for jobs. And so 200,000 people is not a huge amount to have on welfare that are, as an entire nation, who wouldn't otherwise be there if the economy was running slightly nicer. Now, the other thing to notice to put this in perspective is, as I said, there's about 1 million people who are on the dole. There are almost 2.5 million people who are on the aged pension. So these people who are basically too old to work. So even if they did want to work, which most of them are not capable of working, they wouldn't be able to get a job anyway. And that 2.5 million, so that's 2.5 times as many people on welfare. That has got nothing to do with essentially the policies of the government. There's not a lot you can do about having a very aged population. You can't make 65-year-olds or 70-year-olds work, and even if you could, you really can't get them jobs. Certainly anybody over 70, you're going to be very much struggling. And that's really where the budget problem is that the numbers of people past retirement age in Australia has been rising and will continue to steadily rise. Whereas the number of working age people will steadily decrease as a percentage of the population over the next 10 to 20 years. And that's what's the real killer to the budget. And so we are in a strong position at the moment, but there is a crisis looming because we know that the population is simply getting older. And so the number of people... I saw one statistic that's something like, 20, 30 years ago maybe, it was like there were 10 working aged people for every one post-retirement age, as in retirement age. And in 10 to 20 years, we were expecting there to be about 2 or 2.5 working age people for every retirement age person in Australia. That is a massive shift. And what has compounded this is that successive previous governments, so the most recent Labor governments, the 2 terms of Labor government, and the 11 odd years of coalition government before that, basically, because the economy was in such good shape at the time, and because a huge amount of the revenue was not based on income taxes, that is, we were deriving a lot of revenue from things like expenditure via the GST, and things like mining royalties, etc. What that meant was that the governments have taken these politically popular approach of cutting income taxes, which everybody loved. And so we've actually had a significant cuts in income taxes over the last 15 to 20 years. Now that we're coming out of that phase, income taxes are now too low to raise enough revenue. And we're in a bit of a catch-22, because even if you raised it, the number of people paying income taxes is going to be steadily going down as a percentage of our population. That's what the crisis is, and it's got very little to do with whether... So we are currently a strong position, but we know that that's not going to last. So that's the crisis. And you actually would know this if you read the articles in the paper that actually told you about this. There's actually been some really good articles in here over the last several weeks about the budget, mainly in the editorial pages. So you have to actually read beyond the, gratuitous front page type stuff. Next letter. The debt crisis, 22nd of May 2014. How is it that almost every country has an excessive spiralling debt? How is it allowed to happen and who benefits? Brad Capes Kubler. That is a very good question, and you would go some way towards understanding this if you read, as I said, the editorial pages in the paper, but not necessarily. So there's several factors here, and obviously this is a very complex subject because we're dealing with many countries, but I'm going to simplify it as much as I can and do some broad generalizations. So there is a political factor at play here. Essentially the way it goes is you've got, in gross simplification terms, you've got a left wing and a right wing. And left wing governments, their approach is generally to tax relatively highly and spend on welfare programs relatively highly. So that's what the US would call tax and spend liberals. On your right, you have an ideology that's basically reversed of that. The idea is low taxes, low spending. So most countries essentially swing between the two. So you have a bit of left wing, and then you have a bit of right wing, and you have a bit of left wing and a bit of right wing. And each time they come in, they try and bring in their policies. Now, most countries also have, neither party will have absolute power for long enough to completely shift the whole fabric of their economy. So they'll bring in some reforms. So generally what happens is the left wing reforms, they want to raise taxes and they want to spend more. The right wing want to block the spending of taxes because that is against their ideology. But the spending of more things on people that they like, i.e. middle class welfare and corporate welfare, is something that is popular, and so generally they support that. So when the left wing government is in power, what we tend to see is taxation rates will stay flat, maybe go up a little bit, but spending rates will creep up quite steadily. And then they get booted out and we get the right wing in. Now the right wing want to cut taxes and they want to cut spending. Now again, the left will block them on most of those measures. But while they will vociferously stop them from cutting spending, in general, tax cuts are popular, and so the left will support tax cuts. So what happens is when the left are in power, you get increased spending, and when the right are in power, you get decreased taxes. And so you get this gentle ratcheting over time where spending goes up and taxes go down. Spending goes up, taxes go down. That is unsustainable. And that's to some extent where we found ourselves in many economies at this point, where there has been an erosion of sensible politicians erosion of support for sensible politicians who'll say, look, this is not this is not working, we have to do one or the other. The other thing is once people have got their tax cuts or their spending or their welfare from the government, they feel very much entitled to that. Left or right, rich or poor, everybody feels entitled to that. So one of the major things that's happened particularly in European countries, where they've been more left-leaning than right-leaning on a sort of global scale, is you've had entrenchments of rights to things like pensions. Now the problem with pensions is they are not one-off payments. So here in Australia, we've had a lot of middle-class welfare thrown at people over the last 20 to 15 years. But these are annual payments. So these are like, you've got a kid, have some money. You have another kid, have some more money. When you stop having kids, you stop getting the money. The problem with pensions is that you are promising money ad infinitum. And so a lot of the problems have come about, and also in the US, their pensions are seen as being the responsibility of private corporations, and therefore those corporations, particularly things like airlines, and those traditional manufacturing jobs, like the automobile manufacturing, have had big problems with this. Is that essentially they promised these payments for pensions 10, 20, 30 years ago. And at the time it seemed reasonable. Now their income, the government revenues have fallen through the floor. There've been all sorts of issues. But they've made these promises and people feel entitled to them. And so in some ways, making promises of pensions like that you get pension payments attached to your job, but they're not funded at the time that you're working, sets up this situation where you have these massive debts. So those are probably the two major factors that I've identified. There's a lot of other ones out there, probably, depending on each individual case. It's something that we have, broadly speaking, only recently come to in Australia, which is why we're in a much better position. Pensions here are exceedingly low. There really aren't any value, big solid pensions. About the only people who get any decent employment-related pensions are politicians, and we complain about it all the time. The superannuation system that was brought in, whenever that was brought in, was a fantastic idea. Basically, for anybody who doesn't understand, a portion of your wages are paid into, and it doesn't actually feel like a portion of your wages because that's always on top of your wages. It gets paid into essentially an enforced savings account, so that all employees in Australia have a mandatory savings plan essentially for their retirement. And there's all sorts of tax concessions revolving around that. There's all sorts of laws that stop you from getting to that money. But as I say, it's not treated as part of your salary, even though in some ways it technically is, which means that we have a much higher percentage of people who are self-funded, especially amongst, say, middle class and lower middle class people who in other countries would be relying entirely on the state. So there you go. Short, simple question, long-winded answer. Next. Welfare poser, 23rd of May 2014. Correspondents are crying foul over proposed budget cuts to welfare payments, saying it is grossly unfair that high-income earners are paying less via the budget repair levy than they are losing in welfare payments. How is it fair if I, as a taxpayer, am handing over more of my own money while welfare recipients are just complaining about receiving less of mine? Kevin Woods, Claremont. Okay, so there's several things wrong with this. It's based on a very sort of simplistic and wrong idea that, in essence, you should get back from the government what you pay in strictly financial sense. So that you pay taxes, you get back in services. And that simply is not sustainable. This is not the way that any economy is ever going to work. you will always have people who are better off subsidizing people who are worse off. That's always going to be the case. So there's always going to be a chunk of people. Usually it's a relatively small number of very wealthy people who are disproportionately funding and paying taxes that support a larger number of people who are particularly poorly off. Now, how is this fair? Good question. So there's probably three main arguments for why this is a fair arrangement. So the first argument is that whether you're in the paying of taxes or receiving of welfare camp, hopefully will change over time. So the idea here, most societies are based around this idea that you may receive welfare at some parts in your life, but you will be paying taxes in others. When you're young, you might be unemployed, or you might have trouble finding a job or whatever, and get paid, not be very well off, and you'll receive government assistance. As you get a decent job, you start earning, you'll pay that back essentially, or you'll pay more taxes. And the idea is that, roughly speaking, this should balance out over time for most people. Now, that said, obviously there will always be people who will never quite make it in life, never quite pay back as much in taxes as they've received in benefits. And there are some people who are just going to be doing well in life all the way through and will be paying taxes without receiving back in welfare a commensurate amount. So the second argument for why it's fair is the idea that it builds a society that we all want to live in. So this is a purely self-serving thing that you may well be rich and well off, but a lot of societies in the world where there is high inequality, so if we're thinking about maybe some Latin American countries, maybe some African countries, where it is better to be not as well off here paying relatively high taxation rates than it is to be well off there paying low taxation rates, because you don't have the same stability in your society, you don't have the same safety, because you have so part of what you're paying in your taxes as a wealthy person is to keep a country where people have decent health care, where people have income support, where crime rates are low, education is high. And so what you have is the safety and the security of living in a relatively stable and happy society. So that benefits you directly. The third argument for why it's fair is simply maybe this is I don't think this is a uniquely Australian thing, but we like to think of Australians as being fairly egalitarian, and that is that those people who are having a hard time of things, those people who have a hard life and maybe never make it, we look at them and think, there but for the grace of God go I, to quote a religious phrase, or basically that it could have been, that bugger could have been you. And so there's a basic sense of compassion that, if you're doing well in life, it kind of is your responsibility to help out those people who aren't doing so well. And those are probably the three main arguments for why it's fair. Also, don't forget that you still receive back from the government things like roads and other infrastructure that you don't necessarily see as welfare. But yeah, that's why it's fair. And if you don't like it, there are other countries out there. We can see what our country would be like if we didn't have such a progressive tax system, if we didn't believe in rich people subsidizing poor people. You can look around the world and see other countries that are like that, and you can judge whether that's the kind of nation that you want to live in. A lesson to learn, 24th of May 2014. Recent student protests in capital cities that targeted federal budget cuts to HEX funding are a disgrace. They need to realise there are no free lunches anymore. Es crudden quinana. And here's the thing, es crudden of quinana, there are no free lunches when it comes to HEX. So the whole idea of HEX stands for the Higher Education Contribution Scheme. And essentially what this is a low interest loan that the government gives to basically all Australian university students. So they loan you your student fees, essentially, and then you pay it back when you earn over a certain amount. So there's a sort of a threshold in your income tax, and once you start earning over that certain amount, you pay more tax to pay back those loans. This is a relatively generous loan arrangement, but it is still a loan arrangement. And so the idea that a university is somehow a free lunch, it hasn't been since the introduction of HEX, and that was 20 odd years ago now. Prior to that, higher education was essentially free, and the vast majority of parliamentarians who are bringing in the current and the most recent changes to universities to make students pay and make them, now make them pay more, did indeed get an absolute free lunch at university. They are the ones who, didn't have to put up with the idea of no free lunch anymore. So there you go. Paying for bad habits, 26th of May 2014. I, for one, have no sympathy for people who cannot afford the $7 medical co-payment. Though it should be exempt for those born with disability, have a medical issue not of their own making, such as a car crash, and people aged over 60. The fee should also be on a sliding scale. Smokers, heavy drinkers, and those obese through bad choices of food or lack of exercise must pay a premium for their decisions. Ray Bourne, Silver Sound. Yeah, because it's not enough of a premium for you to get lung cancer or cirrhosis of the liver. No, we need to hit you every time you go to the GP. I mean, the stupid thing about this $7 bloody go to the GP charge is, one, it'll raise bugger all money. The cost of administering it, especially in places like where they're talking about bringing in a similar co-payment into hospitals to stop people from going to the hospital rather than their GP to avoid the fee. Hospitals are not set up to receive these kind of monies. And so the cost of administering this scheme will probably wipe out most of the money that it brings in. Secondly, the only people who will actually really be affected by it are those people who most need to go to GP anyway. Those people who are poor and therefore more likely to be unhealthy. Those people with chronic medical illnesses that need repeated monitoring by a doctor are the ones who will be most discouraged. And the bottom line for our society is that this will cost us in the end. We know that trips to the general practitioner save us money in the long run. People who are regularly looked after by their primary care physician, or whatever you want to call them, their family doctor, end up costing the state less because they don't get as sick and they need less hospital admissions, which are the really expensive part of medical treatment. So for the measly few $1 million that this will make for the federal budget, which is a pittance for the size of the budget, they should have taken it from somewhere else. And the other thing is, I like this idea that you have no sympathy for anybody, except for those people who have disabilities, which, fair enough, but those born with, and people aged over 60. I suspect that perhaps you are aged over 60. GPS made us road hogs, 27th of May 2014. A segment in Alston's cartoon in the Weekend West, 24th of the 5th, depicted the road hog in the right-hand lane. This is a view from yesteryear because of GPS. In an area I don't know, GPS can direct me to the right-hand lane and to stay there to turn right, sometimes 1 kilometre away. At speed limits, you are not a road hog because no one can pass you legally anyway. But there's always someone better or faster, as depicted in the cartoon. Julian Stanwick's Como. Oh, Julian. So, yes, I personally don't believe in speeding, and I'm fairly pedantic about my own speed, but I also recognise that part of the smooth flowing of traffic involves people driving at all different speeds that are not necessarily set entirely by the speed limit. And certainly the idea of a right-hand lane for people who want to drive faster can actually help with traffic congestion, and that's something that I certainly would like us to minimise as much as possible. And so the idea that you should be, that there's nothing wrong with sitting in the right-hand lane, driving at the speed limit, I think is purely false. I think in some situations you are blocking up traffic that could be flowing more freely, just simply because you're being pedantic about the speed limit. Just because you feel the need to sit at the speed limit, which I do too, doesn't mean that I feel that I have the right to impose that on anybody else. And secondly, just because the GPS is telling you you're going to turn right in a kilometre, doesn't mean you have to get in the right lane. These things are usually well signposted, and if you're paying attention to where you're driving, even in areas you're not familiar with, you shouldn't necessarily have to sit in the right lane just because in several kilometres' time you're going to be turning right. If GPS is that much of a hassle for you, perhaps you should go back to reading your map book. Anyway, that's it for this week. I've had enough of a rant. I'll see you all next week and when we find out what's happening in the West. See you later.